And then in addition to just a one note, we do have kind of a hierarchy to our standards. So you can have, we just generically call it a parent standard. Some people think of them as graduation standards or strands. And then the standards underneath them, or sometimes they're the learning target and the standard, kind of just depending on how, how you guys do your standards and how those are set up. And then to create a new assessment, just click the new assessment button down here, give it a title, be really creative here. I have my unit that it's in. I have the type of assessment, so whether this is a summative or formative assessment. Types are also customizable, so you could do it as format. If some people like to use it as format, but this is probably the most common way that it's set up. And if I select formative, then down here you'll notice this weight goes to 0. And so this assessment's no longer going to be used in any of the calculations. It's just a check for me as a teacher and for the student to see how they're doing. And then without
weights our assignments, is it a possibility to take that off of this assessment details screen?
Or to lock.
Do you guys do any formative or summative, or is it everything just the same?
Summative, but we don't weight.
Yeah, so you could just lock it down so that the teachers really couldn't edit this. And if it was summative, it would just be 1, and if it was formative, it would be 0.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then let's see. So another thing I noticed on here was kind of the ability to hide things from parents. And so we can choose whether or not this assessment is published in reports. And so this will determine whether or not it shows up on the parent-student portal. We have an additional screen on the parent-student portal that is shows upcoming. So this might be upcoming work. And we could say, well, let's show this for the next 2 weeks on the portal. If I wanted to add attachments for the student to be able to access on the portal, we can do, I can upload documents, connect to Google Drive, you can take pictures of things and do all that, and attach files or web links to this particular assessment. And then once I've done creating the assessment, I'll have, I have to add a due date. To do that. And so now I have my new assessment down here, but I haven't aligned this to any standards yet. So if I were to go to the gradebook, try and enter scores in, I wouldn't be able to do that. So first I have to check off these, the standards that I am assessing. And I think, yeah, down here. So we also have 2 concepts of standards. So we have your academic standards. We also have non-academic standards. And so that could be habits of work, 21st century skills. There's a lot of different models that people use and we support. But we can both assess the academic standards and the non-academic standards within a single assessment. And we treat those fairly similarly. But then when we're looking at maybe course grades, depending on how you calculate those or what you do for course grades, then we can kind of treat those differently, the same way we might treat summative and formative assessments differently. All right, and so that's setting up the assignments. Is there any questions on this or anything else that I think that's
nope, we're good.
Covers everything.
Cool. For that assignment.
Great. And so when I want to enter scores in for the assignment, the next step I would go to the gradebook and we'll select our course and our unit again. And then down here at the bottom now we're starting to kind of look like a normal gradebook, right? We've got the columns and numbers here with our number scale that's set up at the school. I can select my new assessment that I've created and you'll see that there's 4 columns here that I can enter scores in for, 1 for each of the standards that I've aligned this assessment to. And then from here, works a lot like an Excel spreadsheet where I can enter in scores. And you'll notice that all these scores are highlighted in yellow. Just means those haven't saved yet. They save automatically, periodically as you're entering scores in. And once we verify that they've been saved, then the yellow highlighting goes away. So teachers can know, hey, my scores are saved and I don't have to worry about any connectivity issues or anything.
So right here in this view, when you're scoring the assignment, are you able to go up to, say, one of the scholars' scores, the first one, Danielle, and if you right click on that too, are you able to flag it saying it was turned in or turned in late, or put a message or a comment?
Yeah, so I can double click on any of the scores, and here I have an opportunity to put in a comment for it. I can choose whether the comment's public or private. And then if I want to, I can also update the date of the assessment. So let's say it was kind of a retake, and orders can be important sometimes in some of our calculations. And so you can update the date that the assessment was handed in. As far as like flagging it as having been late, we do have a way to do that. We can't do that with like alongside of having a score saved, but we can do like, if the student didn't hand it an assessment, we can put in M's, and then you can choose what the value of that M score is. So depending on what your philosophy is on missing work, maybe it's just a placeholder. It doesn't actually count. Sometimes people want it to count as a 1 or a 0 or something on their scale. And then we can do multiple missing work, because I can't remember. Yeah, so for this demo, then X here is actually, in our demo, X is like missing and counts, and then M is missing, doesn't count. So there's different options that you have for setting those up.
For that comment box that you brought up, is there the ability for the district to have pre-entered comments like from a drop down, or is that just an open text box?
It's an open text box. Okay, I'm just scanning this list here. I'll just talk about a couple other things. One is just differentiation. So for in Jumpro, if I don't enter in scores for a student, they're not going to see this assessment on their progress report. So there's no, you don't need to mark anything as like exempt or excused or anything like that. It's just the scores that are there are the scores that a student's going to be assessed on. So if I can even enter in just partial scores, if maybe I'm only assessing this student on a particular standard, or another common example we have is if a teacher in, let's say, the 5th grade has students that are working on 4th grade standards and 6th grade standards, all of these standards aligned to this assessment may be sort of in the same strand, but they're different grade levels versions of that standard. And so I can score each individual student on just the aspect that they're working on. And then, each student is going to get a customized progress report based on just the scores that the teachers entered in for them, and not anything that any other students have worked on. So that way, if a student comes to me and says, hey, I've got this other project that I'm, thinking I want to work on, really struggling with this standard, but I think I have a way that, I can show you that I know this material, and then they can, you could just create an assessment just for one student, score that one student, and then no other student would see that on their progress report.
Alrighty, that's great. So from here, what would be that next step in looking at, say, summary reports, or what would you do as a teacher next to look at full standards capability, how the student's doing the profiles?
Yeah, so I pull up, go to my courses tab, and I'd pull up my humanities course, and I would go to the mastery tab, and this is where I can start to see a summary of kind of how my students are doing. So there's a couple different views here. Like this view is kind of the overall score for each student in the class. And then I can click into any of these students, and I can see kind of the details from that. Here's their academic standards. Here's their, here's we call them in our demo graduation standards, and then we have the standards underneath them. And I can click down into that and see I can always get down to the individual assessments. So it's easy to kind of like find a student that you want to work on, that you want to, you're working with, click down, kind of get a view of what's going on with that student. Right here, we can see that Maria here struggling with applications of social studies and skills, really killing it on history and writing arguments and the other standards. So this view is kind of great if you're just looking at the students, but then really I think the powerful aspect of standards-based grading is getting to look at the standards themselves. And so I can kind of flip this whole view and I can look at, okay, here's all the standards that I'm teaching in my course. And here's how the students are doing overall on those standards. And so I can look at, for this particular standard, here's all the students and how they're doing on this particular standard. And if I wanted to, I could click in and see, their individual assessment performance on as well. And then in addition to this view here, we also have more of a table style report. So I can look at the same information, but kind of just having it all at once right in front of me here. And so I can see here's all the students, all the standards kind of organized under their parent standard.
One more time how you got to that screen.
Yeah, there's a little report selector down here at the bottom. And so from here is where I can kind of choose which view that I'm looking at.
Oh, can we choose which default that might come up the moment they go into that course? Like if we like this view the most and that's what they're going to use the most, then could we default that?
Right now, no. It just defaults to the student summary.
One more question. On the entering scores within an assignment, can you actually do an all fill in a column instead of individual fill?
Yeah, so if I have a way that it works is, let's say I've filled in these students, but everybody else has a 3. I can just select the 3 that I want to fill, and then I can just hit the control and then the arrow key down, and it'll just fill down. And then I can also, if I want to, fill across as well. Okay, so there were a couple other, let me just on a couple things with around the student summary. One of all the scores for a standard was one of the things. If I wanted to see we have a ton of other information that you can kind of show on these reports. I won't go into too many of them, but for example, you could see score count, which would give me an idea of how many times I've assessed each of these students. And if we were going in looking at individual standards, I could see, okay, I've assessed. Okay, so I've only assessed history once, but reading and writing I both assessed twice. So it's really easy to kind of get access to more information than just the scores that you see here on the screen. And you can do that through the show hide columns here. So I can see things like missing work, so I can kind of get an idea if the students been handing in all their work or not. We can look at things like growth, kind of overall, how they're doing in their progress towards meeting the standard, and a bunch of other information here.
Great. One question that came up is when you drop the district assessments in there in that, I believe it's the plan tab, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When the district assessments are dropped and then they're scored by the teacher, how do those district assessment scores combine? Do those assessment scores combine with the scores that the teacher gave on those same standards so that you get an overall score for that scholar with both?
Yeah, so we would treat any like district created assessment or teacher created assessment the same. We don't really do assessment scores or treat like assessments differently. So you wouldn't, by default, oh, excuse me. By default, I'm sorry. By default, we don't really have like an assessment view, but we could create like a custom report that allowed you to view, all the scores across the district for a particular assessment. Like we have reports where you can, in the district interface, I only have the teacher interface pulled up, but in the district interface, we could create reports where you could look at that assessment across like all students and see how they're doing. But in the teacher interface and for the individual student, we wouldn't treat the district created assessment any different than like a teacher created assessment.
Oh, that's great. So if you could show us the output for the end of marking period into report cards, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll show you two different screens here. One is so teachers have the ability to kind of take a look at the final grades for the students. Do you guys do like a final grade?
So we do that at secondary only, but at the elementary
Uh-huh.
level, we would be going to the reporting standard.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I think our demo account is getting a little old and the date ranges pulling up. Well, this would be the view. I actually don't usually demo this, so I'm gonna. Well, this would be the view. It's not pulling up for this particular course. As you can see, we built this demo quite a while ago. Anyway, so this view, I can show you what it kind of would look like. It's basically this same report here with all the students listed, and then the teacher can go in and override the score if they want to. And it gives them kind of a space to override the score, and then a space they can click and add a comment to the course as well. And then what the report actually looks like for a student. I'll show you what it looks like to just generate one for a single student, but then this all can be, typically this would be done, site-wide, like somebody at a school would generate the progress report for the student. We can choose kind of when we're printing, over what range, and then the school will have a default setup. That's typically what you would use if you did want to print something that wasn't the default. You could customize that. And then we would just run this one report for Mary here. And then all of our reporting generates PDFs. And then this would be Mary's PDF here. And then depending on, obviously, what you want it to look like and what data you want on it, you could have different things. And then when we do it school-wide, you can choose to have it organized by like a period of the day, or you could choose to have it organized by, some particular cohort setup, so that you can easily, or you can just do it alphabetically and easily print and distribute the reports. And there's also the option to have them emailed too if you don't want to. If you don't want to print them.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that view. We actually have to close our session now. Are there any final thoughts you have for us, or anything you'd like to show us to finalize our view for today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I'll show you guys that people find really helpful is that we didn't touch on kind of from the teacher perspective is that over time we keep an archive of the student's performance. And so as a teacher, you don't just have access to how your students did this year and the scores that you put in, but you can also see previous scores that the students had from the year before. And we kind of keep track of that and give teachers access to that so that they can, day one, as you're planning for your students, before you've even had them in the classroom, you can see, hey, here's how my students did last year, and maybe find any weaknesses or strengths, and be able to plan your class before you even really have the students in there. And then I'll touch on this too, because I like to talk about it. We have a really great customer support, and teachers can use this as well as administrators. You can go to the Contact Us, select a topic here, like planning. You can select an emotional state, how you're feeling at the time, which I don't know if anybody's really ever excited about using software, but sometimes. And then you can select a subject and a description. And one really powerful tool that we've developed is having the ability to have school or district administrators CC'd on these so that you guys can see kind of what the questions are that teachers are asking. Because a lot of times those questions aren't really, how do I use Jumpro? They're, what's my school's philosophy around standards-based grading, and what does that mean for how I use Jumpro? And so it's a really cool tool because you'll be able to see how we respond to technical questions, and we can see how you respond to philosophical questions, and kind of together learn a lot about the implementation and be able to even support you in a better way with that. So.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. Just so you know, for our process, we are going to compile our notes. If we have any additional questions, I'll email and call you. But our next step is to look at the potential of bringing a couple of the options that we're looking at to another committee to be able to extend our learning and to get additional feedback. But I will be in touch. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.